Hey, this is Jeff, and this is part 2 in how does the AR15 work and all of its parts, and then hopefully eventually we'll go assemble one in complete totality so you get kind of an idea about it. So what I wanted to explain exactly is how the AR15 works. I guess let's first start off with just a little bit of basics about how a gun works in general. So in particular a pistol or a rifle. So it is made up of, if we start off, a gun really is part chemical reaction, part mechanics. So you're going to have a bullet or a cartridge here. Actually, a cartridge. We'll start off with the cartridge. The cartridge itself is really, it's 4 different pieces. So there's going to be the cartridge itself. Inside the cartridge, there is going to be a propellant. Let's just call it gunpowder for reasons of simplicity. There's going to be something that ignites it. In modern cartridges, that is going to be a primer, and a primer is a really small explosive that can be set off with essentially a violent percussion. And then inside of that, there's actually going to be a bullet. So here we have one that is in 223, I believe. Yep, it is 223. So pretty standard load for an AR-15. And this particular one is inert. So what I just did was I just grabbed a used cartridge. You can see it still has a primer. Primer actually is dented, you can see here, so it actually has been fired. There's no propellant inside of here, and I just grabbed a bullet and just seated it. Well, it's barely seated inside of there, just to make it look like it was a fully working cartridge. So anyway, we've got that there. So in a typical gun, you're going to have a barrel. This sits in there. The cartridge is seated into the barrel. There's going to typically be a receiver, like there is right here, and then inside of there is going to be a bolt, and that bolt actually moves forward so that it actually seats up against the edge of the barrel there, and seals off the chamber. And the chamber itself is going to be just about the width of the bullet itself. Actually, I'm drawing this not exactly correct, but you'll get kind of the idea here. So essentially, the bolt inside of there actually has a firing pin. That firing pin will typically be hit forward via kind of a mechanical movement. So why this is mechanical and chemical. The firing pin moves forward. It actually strikes the primer. The primer then ignites. It actually ignites the gunpowder that's inside of there. Then that ignition, since this is completely sealed off, essentially there is a pressure that gets developed. The bullet then goes off and down the barrel. And then what typically happens is that, and depending on the gun, you're either going to manually or automatically actually eject the spent cartridge and potentially even reload a brand new one into it. So let's actually go through that mechanics inside of the gun itself, and I'll show you in terms of actually how the gun works. So remember, inert bullet, there's no powder inside of here. It's already got a fired primer, so I just wanted to use it as my example here. You can see me actually moving the bullet within the cartridge because it's actually not proper. So all right, so here we got the AR-15. So magazine. This is actually a gun that it's pretty hard to load a single shot inside of. So you're typically going to have a magazine. They come in different sizes, typically 5, 10, 20, 30, and then sometimes bigger ones. I think this is a 20 right here, so that actually goes inside the magazine well. Now, if you were listening there for a second, you actually heard the click. So in terms of mechanically how this is working is that the magazine, I'm going to pop it out here, you'll actually see here that there actually is a hole that's right here. And if you remember from my other video, I actually was moving the magazine release here. So this magazine release is actually spring loaded. So what happens is when you load the magazine in, it pops in there, it just goes past this piece of metal on the inside, and then the spring holds it in place. So now the magazine is actually sitting there in place. The button that I was actually pushing a second ago was actually that one, right? You see the magazine then releases, so now we have it in. So the next thing, so right at this point in time, the gun can't fire because the you can see here, it's like the cartridge is still in the magazine, still there. Plus, we do have this gun on safety here. Even obviously, if we were to put it into the fire position, it cannot fire because a few mechanical things have not happened yet. So this is completely safe, although all standard rules would say that you don't want to handle a gun in this position, so you really want to have it on safety. Now, the next thing that has to happen is that that cartridge has to be loaded against the bolt face and put into the chamber for us to take the next step. So on an AR15, that is going to be, we have to use the charging handle to do that. So the charging handle, if we pull this back, you can see here the dust cover pops open. You can actually see the bolt go backwards. I'm pulling against the spring that's actually here in the buffer tube, and at this point you would typically let that go loose like that. Now in this case, it actually, this is the problem with doing exactly what I'm doing is since this is kind of a goofy cartridge with the bullet just seated in it, it actually did not feed properly into the chamber. So we'll do it slowly here. So you can actually see the bolt is going forward and it has pushed it into the chamber. You can see that it did not fully seat, as you can see right there. That's actually where this forward assist comes in. Normally what will happen is if it's a proper bullet, it'll properly feed in. The force of the spring will actually, with the bolt, will actually grab that bullet, seat it onto the bolt face, and push it into the chamber. And typically you will not have to use this forward assist. But actually it was a great example because you got to see one of the few times when you actually would use a forward assist to get it to seat properly. So now at this point, cartridge is actually loaded into the chamber. We're now to the next stage of where the gun could actually be fired. For anything to happen, we'd actually have to be off of safety, right? And then we would actually then have to pull the trigger, right? Again, it's not an operating bullet, or operating cartridge, so it doesn't really matter right now. I will not pull it, but what we'll do is we'll go through what actually happens. So we'll leave it on safe here as I just show you exactly what happens. So, all right. So we had the magazine. The magazine actually has this spring inside it and a plate. Sitting on that plate actually is that cartridge. So what happens next is, so that cartridge is sitting there. It's actually sitting kind of up against this, spraying against the lip here and this bottom plate. And then sitting right above it is actually typically is going to be that bolt, right? So it actually can't go up. So you remember earlier we actually had the charging handle here. You pull back that charging handle that drives back the bolt, right? So at that point in time, the bolt is back, and the bullet actually can go up. There, the bolt is actually compressing a spring that is sitting here in the buffer tube, and so it's actually getting compressed. So when you compress a spring, it wants to release its energy. So as soon as you let go of the bolt handle here, or the charging handle, the bolt is actually going to go push forward. This cartridge is already sitting up right here, and it gets pushed into the chamber, right? Then at that point, the gun is almost ready to fire. We've got the trigger here, and then we've got the safety that's inside of there. So what has to happen is the safety has to go off, otherwise this trigger will not release. And at that point, if you pull the trigger, it'll let loose based upon there's a spring inside of here, it'll let loose the hammer. The hammer goes forward, it hits the firing pin, it hits the primer, ignites the propellant, shoots the bullet out, right? So pretty simple. So the other things that happen, and I'd mentioned this a little bit before in the other video, is that so you have the barrel itself. There's the chamber. Got the cartridge inside of there. There also happens to be this gas block that's sitting there, and there's a small hole that goes down into the chamber. So it's gas that's essentially propelling the bullet. That gas is pushing the bullet out of the barrel. Hits where the gas block is. There's a really small hole that's here. Some of that gas goes up, and it goes into the gas block, and there's only one way it can go out, which is through a gas tube. And that gas tube actually goes back into the upper receiver. And so you have the bolt that's there, it's sitting up against the cartridge, but it also has this, and I don't remember the technical term for it, actually has this gas receiver that's here. It mates actually inside the gun with that gas tube. The gas literally doesn't have anywhere to go, so it actually pushes back that bolt carrier group back into that spring, right? So now it goes back. Of course, that back motion again, if there's another cartridge inside of the magazine, the spring that is here actually will push up the next cartridge. It'll go up into there. Cartridge, or the bolt carrier group, will go back forward, loading the next cartridge in, and we just rinse and repeat. Of course, this is semi-automatic, not automatic. So it means that the trigger group is got to cycle itself. And actually there's a mechanism in how it actually cycles itself, but it won't go through a full cycle. So let's actually take the gun apart, and we can kind of showcase this stuff as well again too. So I'm going to take the magazine out. I am going to... Actually, this is one of the problems with doing this the way I did it, is I'm going to have to actually push that cartridge out here in a second, because it got seated funny. It didn't get seated on the bolt face the way it should have. Problems with how I showed you guys how this works here. 1 second. Because now I'm in a spot where the... Darn it. Made a dumb mistake in my video showing you this stuff. 1 second. I figure this quickly out without this looking completely stupid on my end, which of course it does a little bit at the moment. This is one of the issues that can happen because right now at this point in time There we go. All right, great. The cartridge that's in there was not fully against the bolt carrier group, and it wasn't fully grasping it, so the bolt was a little bit stuck back in there. All right, so let's actually show you guys a little bit about how the trigger kind of works without taking the trigger out, and I'll actually do a separate video on the trigger. So we got the trigger assembly in there. It is literally just, it's two parts, the hammer and the trigger itself. There's two springs. There's the safety we got here. You'll see here with it on safety, I cannot release the pressure that's taught in the spring here to move the hammer forward because the safety is stopping us. But as soon as I put it on safety, and now if I pull, the spring will release its energy, and you'll see that the hammer flies forward, right? So pretty simple operation. If I put on safety, should never ever work under no circumstances. Even if you bang it around, it should not release, but as soon as you take it off safety, it is like that. So, all right, so now let's get a few more pieces here to show you. All right, out goes the cartridge. Now we've got those parts out. I have got my makeshift cartridge here, which by now you can actually see I literally did push a bullet into there. So no big deal. So now what we can do is we can just go through the mechanics of exactly how this stuff works in real life for you here. So this makes it a little bit more fun. So now let's do kind of an exploded view. So trigger is going to be back. It's going to be on safety. Now inside the gun is exactly looks like that, as we see here. So bolt carrier group, you'll see here that there is an empty spot here where the trigger actually can fly forward. You can actually see the pin that's inside of there. You can see the gas receiver that's right there. You can see the bolt face that is right there, and the magazine. So, kind of as we were talking about before, just to go through it again, the cartridge is sitting there inside of the magazine, right? It can't go up, right? Because this is actually in this position right here. We would also, this would be exactly like this as well too, right? Charging handle like that. So what happens is you pull back with that handle. It's going to go push up against. You can actually hear that spring getting taut. So you can see that. All right. And as you see here, when this guy goes back here, there's actually a ramp. So let's do this real quick. Put this in the firing position, leave it like that. So if this guy, if the trigger was in a already been fired position, what happens is when you pull the charging handle back, it's actually cocking the trigger. You just saw that, right? So now the trigger is in a cock position, right? It's now like that. It's ready to be fired. Actually, let's keep it on safety here, right? And so what happens now, the bullet would actually be, the cartridge would actually be seated on the bolt face in the chamber. Bolt carrier group is all the way back, and we're now in the safety position, right? So can't pull. But as we take it off of safety, it actually allows that actually to fire. At that point in time, actually I'm going to hold my finger because you should never really beat up your trigger group by letting it hit. So as soon as we pull the trigger, it releases the energy of the spring. The trigger flies forward. It hits the back of the firing pin, which is a little bit bigger surface. On the front here, the firing pin is more like a pin, it actually hits the primer as we talked about, causes that chemical reaction, shoots out the bullet, goes out, right? Goes down the barrel, gas gets released through the gas block, goes back through the gas tube. The gas tube actually mates with this gas receiver right here, pushes that back, does exactly the same thing. That gets set to be pulled once again, right? Magazine pushes up another bullet, and then there we can fire again. But here's the difference, is that this is semi-automatic, which means that essentially it goes through everything once, but what it doesn't automatically do is it doesn't automatically fire the trigger again. It doesn't automatically release the trigger spring, right? You'd have to have an automatic for that to happen. All right, so I think I just went through all the real basics of exactly how this thing fires. Hopefully that makes a ton of sense. Actually, it was really good for me because I've thought about it as I've been troubleshooting things, building guns, as to exactly how this stuff works, but I've never really kind of explained it this thoroughly before, so it's kind of fun for me too. So with that, we'll end, and hopefully we'll do some more videos where you will see more of how this stuff works in the future. Thanks much. Bye.